So, let's get started. Climate change is the fight of our generation. As we gather here in Azerbaijan to discuss all things climate and climate finance, I note that experiences with climate change are not equal around the world. In my own life, I have witnessed the adverse impacts of climate change both in Australia and in my home country of Zimbabwe. In Australia, I narrowly survived a bushfire twice, and I had my house badly damaged in a superstorm and then in historic floods 2 years later. In Zimbabwe, climate-induced drought has severely limited the water supply across the nation. For my grandparents who are farmers, their crops have failed, their livestock has died, and they've lost their livelihoods due to climate change. Reflecting on this experience, I cannot help but notice that those living on the front lines of the climate crisis are often not at the decision-making table for issues that will fundamentally impact their lives. Girls in the Pacific are at the front lines of the climate crisis. Plan International Australia and Kiribati, the Kiribati Climate Action Network, in partnership with the ANU and Edith Cowan University, spoke to over 350 girls across 6 Pacific islands to hear directly on how climate change impacts their lives. So, what did these girls say? The report found that the climate crisis has disrupted schooling, it has destroyed homes, and led to food and water scarcity. Climate change is making it harder for Pacific girls to learn, to play, and for their families to make a livelihood. In Tuvalu, 74% of girls interviewed said that the climate crisis has stopped them from attending school. Further, girls with disabilities reported being unable to access information in disasters and access evacuation services and shelters designed and dedicated to ensure their safety. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We know that globally, girls often eat last when food runs low. 27% of girls across the Pacific say that there is less food due to climate change, and 19% say they feel hungry because of it. In terms of the unfair burden of care placed upon women and girls, 19% of girls surveyed said that they now work longer on household tasks due to the climate crisis. Here, we see that climate change affects every aspect of a girl's life and that of her family. Climate change is hindering essential rights, such as the right to education and the right to a healthy environment. Whilst Pacific girls are at the front lines of the crisis, they're also at the front lines of fighting for their islands and their cultures on ancestral land. Girls have the solutions and they want to be activists for climate change. And they need to have a seat at that all-important decision-making table. The question is, how do we make this desire a lived reality for all girls across the Pacific, be they from Papua New Guinea or from Kanaki in New Caledonia? In this report, we detail how this can occur. But here with us today, we have 4 trailblazing activists from the Pacific, and we are so honored to learn from their lived experience. So, my name is Kupa, and I'm your moderator today, and I am a youth activist with Plan International. And joining me across the stage is Grace Malie, a youth climate activist from Tuvalu. Grace is deeply committed to amplifying the voices of Tuvaluan youth. She is also a youth representative to the Rising Nations Initiative. Saint Taebo is the Vice President of Tungaru Youth Action. Carolyn, Kitione is the regional representative of Shifting the Power Coalition. She uses community media tools and locally led innovation to forge partnerships across local communities, be it in civil society and across government. And we have Tanya Afu. She's a project coordinator for the Climate Action Network of the Solomon Islands. She's an activist with the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change group. So everyone, please give our activists a round of applause. So, this report is a storytelling report where Pacific girls share their own stories, one of which I'd love to read out for you today. This story comes from a girl named Louisiana. And she said, I had to cross the river every day of my life to reach school or access services. When water levels rise, my mom has to carry me across to go to school. Stories like these are not easy to hear. In as much as they're heartbreaking, they show us the reality of climate change. Which leads to our first question for our panelists, which is, how has climate change impacted your life or the lives of your loved ones, including girls in your community? Grace, we might start off with you.
Thank you, moderator. It is a pleasure to be amongst everyone, including these powerful female activists from the Pacific. The honor is all mine. Just listening to those facts and statistics about 75% on the girls in Tuvalu having to deal with a lot of climate crisis. Just listening to those facts and data, you have to really think, as someone from Tuvalu, I think deeply into those numbers. Because I see these girls every day as I walk, as we, move around the community. And those are just some of the stories that we listen to. Earlier this year, we didn't have a tropical cyclone, we just had a storm. And on the northern part of the island, the seawater started coming onto the land and into the homes and in Tuvalu, many of our communities live among the coastlines. So we had these little kids coming out of their homes, playing in the water, thinking that it was normal, but it was not. And this was just a storm, not a tropical cyclone. And the little girls, they play, hey, come and play with us. And we're like, this is not right. And so in Tuvalu, it's an everyday battle having to deal with this climate crisis, having to deal with the climate impacts. And, in schools, it's something that we have to tell them every day. It's something that they're reminded of every day. And in our community, women voices aren't regarded as important as the men. And so that's why we have so many initiatives in Tuvalu, so many female organizations and female activists that are making change within their communities to make sure that not only the voices of the women, but the young girls are represented in decision-making processes. But I'll leave it to the others. That's all I can get from here.
Powerful. Climate change is an everyday battle. Sane.
Thank you, moderator. I'm Naben Maori, and I would first like to thank the organizers for having me in this panel this morning. It's a privilege. But I would also like to thank Global Center for Climate Mobility, which made it possible for me to be here in person for this panel. And to answer the question, for me, it's about climate change affecting our mental health as girls at the front line dealing with the impact of climate change. As Grace mentioned about the statistics about how climate change is, how it is affecting girls in the Pacific, how it is adding an additional burden to girls and women. For example, we have to work longer doing chores for our family. And in Kiribati, I believe it's the same for other Pacific islands. And women have a critical role in the family as caretakers. When a household is hungry, a woman or a girl is expected to cook for them. When a younger sibling or a child is sick, they look up also to their mothers or older sisters to take care of them. And I have many nieces. I have two nieces from my brother. One is 3 and the other is 4. And I get very emotional every time when I think about how it's going to be harder for them, their lives in the future, um, especially as sea levels are rising. There's going to be prolonged droughts and other environmental impacts that's projected to happen in the future, in the near future. And I could be a mother one day, and just thinking about the extra work I have to do, probably to wake up every morning and think about where to grow, food crops or fruits for my children so that they will be healthy, or to find potable water, where to find potable water, or how my children or my nieces and their family will probably, or they might have to move somewhere else and not on our homeland. What about the culture? What about their heritage if they would be moving? It's a mental stress for me just thinking about all of that. And my trip on my way to attend COP here, it took me about 3.5 days, and I've just been thinking about what my purpose is coming here. And every time I think about my nieces, I get so emotional, like I tear up. But those are the realities for us girls, Pacific girls, especially us in the Pacific Islands. It's, I would like to repeat again, the mental stress, imagining what it would be like for us in the future. Thank you.
Beautifully said, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Kupa. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Plant International as well for giving me this opportunity to be in this panel, and also to be seated here with these amazing Pacific sisters to share our story in regards to climate change. So I come from one of the small islands in Solomon Islands called Foeda, and we are known as the Imolaihasi, which translates to saltwater people. So our way of life and our culture and our identity is closely connected to the land and ocean around us. We depend on the land and ocean for food. However, climate change threatens this connection. Growing up, I used to spend my holidays with my family back in the village. And over the years, I have seen the environmental changes in my village as well as in Honiara. In 2014, I witnessed a flash flood that happened in Solomon Islands in Honiara that displaced a total of around 15,000 people. And I was in high school at that time, and our classrooms were used as evacuation centers, and we were forced to stay at home for nearly 2 months until the government was able to find a land to accommodate these families, these victims of flood. I saw families, I saw parents, young children, mothers and fathers carrying their children and the only belongings that they have, and then coming into our school that afternoon. And it is heartbreaking to see families being squeezed up in a small classroom and were forced to stay there for weeks. And you can see that these are mothers, these are girls that lost their homes, their properties. And for me, that, because we were forced to stay at home at that time, so that is also an infringement of our human rights to education as well. And it is heartbreaking. And for the island that I come from, sea level rise is one of the most evident impacts that we see every day. I have seen high tides destroying homes, flooding our island when we have high tides. And the only playground that we have in the middle of our village becomes flooded when there's high tide. And for us, our children, they see this just as normal. But this is um, the, the, the impacts of the climate crisis that we see. And they were forced to play in this flooded playground because they thought that it's normal, but it's not. And it's heartbreaking to see that children in developed countries, they have beautiful playgrounds. But for us, for my cousins, for young children, young girls, they were forced to play in this flooded playground. And it is unfair because we contribute nothing, but yet we are the ones who are experiencing the impacts every day. This is, our communities are facing the impacts of climate change daily. It is not something that comes once a year or twice a week. It's, they're experiencing it every day. And for young girls back in my village, when we have increasing rainfall, it becomes dangerous for them to travel to go to school because the only school that we have is located in the mainland. And then the mode of transportation is by boat or by canoe. So it becomes dangerous for them to paddle to go to school. So they had to stay at home until the weather is good before they'll be able to go to school. So these are examples of how climate change affects our basic human rights to education, especially for the girls. But with these impacts, our people are resilient. Our frontline communities are resilient with the use of our traditional knowledge to be able to adapt to these changes environments that we face in the community. Thank you.
That was so powerful. You said climate change is unfair. We contribute nothing, but we experience its impacts every day. Carolyn.
I have to do that because every time I come and speak at the Australian Pavilion, for some reason the mic turns off. But listen, before I say what I was invited here to say, I just want to add that it's incredibly powerful to always hear from young women. We always think that girls and young women don't have much to add because we think they have so much to learn, but the truth is they are living the trauma of generational curses that have been put on us, the harm that have been put on communities who have contributed absolutely nothing to the climate crisis. And I think we owe the young women on this panel a huge round of applause because it is hard to come here and talk about these things. It is absolutely difficult to get funding to support young women's leadership in our region of the world. It is hard to get here. And the fact that these young women have taken 3.5 days to come here to share their stories, it's not because we want to share these stories, because this is trauma on us. We have to come here and share our stories because industrial countries have not been listening to us. For generations, we've come here to talk about the impact of climate change on our communities, and now our young people have had to continue that story because none of us have been listening to what has been going on in this region of the world. But just as we become victims of climate change, there is some real leadership as well going on, and it's very evidenced by the work that these young women, that these girls are sharing. Full disclaimer for those of us who cannot see, I am obviously not a I'm not a girl, but I am a young woman who understands that I've had privilege to learn from so many others. And I don't want to repeat the stories that they've shared because those are very unique stories in their context. But I will add that within the coalition, while I am based in Fiji, we work across 6 other Pacific Island countries. One of the reasons that we came together as a coalition is because we recognize that different women, different girls have different priorities. But what we do intend to do as a coalition is to support the strengthening the capacity that already exists. In the coalition, while we don't work directly with girls, we have partners who work with adolescent girls between the ages of 12 and 16. And one of the reasons they do is because they have to take on the work after we step back. They are going to live through the impacts that are going to be worse than what we are experiencing now. And so we've run workshops, we've done the technical work to be able to resource these young girls to respond to the impact of the climate crisis in their communities as they've identified. And a couple of years ago, after we ran this training, some of the trainings to strengthen young girls and young women's capacity to respond to the climate crisis, the volcano eruption in Tonga happened. And that was devastating for everyone in the Pacific because we couldn't get a hold of anyone from Tonga for almost 2-3 days. We did not know what was happening. But the girls from the Talitha project who had gone through the capacity strengthening training with the coalition took their knowledge of rapid response assessments and were actually the first out in their communities with the affected people to get the information out to those of us outside of Tonga. They identified the priorities. They used the tools and the resources that other partners with the coalition had put together to identify and conduct assessment responses because they know from experience that response assessments from the disaster management officials in their governments don't often speak to women and girls. And so having led that first girls' response teams in the Pacific is always going to be an important story for us to tell because it shows that we are not simply victims of the impact of climate change. We are also not just beneficiaries of aid. We are out there, girls are out there leading the responses and identifying what the priorities are from their community. And just as they're coming here to tell those stories, they're also demanding more action because we do need the political will and the action to actually change things in our communities. And so I really wanted to share that we're not just victims of the climate crisis. We are leading the responses. And we do owe it to the generation that's coming alongside of us to be very intentional about the impact that we hope to make in climate spaces such as COP, in spaces such as disaster management conferences. We have an obligation to the generation that's coming up to be also very intentional in the types of partnership and collaboration that we hope to make with Pacific communities. These girls aren't just here telling their stories. They are very actively connected to their climate movements as well in Tuvalu, in Kiribati, in the Solomon Islands. And that's action and leadership that we need to continue to support and invest in. And I'm so very humbled as an older youth person to be sitting here and listening because it's a reminder that the work will continue, that there is hope for political will in these spaces to support and invest in the actions of women and girls in their communities. And so I really just wanted to re-emphasize that we're not just victims of climate change, we are also leading the responses, and it's very evident by the fact that we are here, they are here to advocate on what's important for them in their communities. And I do encourage you, child protection issues at play here, but please come and talk to the young women who are here, who have stories that matter to us. And I do encourage you all to keep in touch as well beyond COP, because it isn't just about COP. The actions matter as well beyond these spaces. Thank you.
Absolutely. Wonderful applause. Wow, that is amazing. We are hearing here from climate activists at the forefront, and we're seeing that Pacific girls are leading the push for solutions. The second question I have for you all is, what role has climate activism played in your life? And what does a roadmap to girl-led feminist climate justice look like to each and every one of you, and particularly in the lead up to COP31? Grace, we'll start with you.
Love it. Thank you. Those were two questions, right? Two questions in one. I love questions. Answering the question is
Our first question is, what role has climate activism played in your life?
thank you for the question. Personally, I started my climate activism since I was 8 years old. I was supposed to be focusing on school, focusing on passing my grades and my lessons, and instead there was another matter, which was climate change. And that has been, it is a living example for many of the Pacific women, many of the Pacific girls, getting involved in this situation at such a young age. And climate activism is basically our entire lives. It's basically a Pacific and small island, I don't like the term small island developing states, big ocean states, young women and girls go through daily in their lives, having to become representatives of their islands, of their nations, in conferences such as this, and having to talk and share about really sensitive and emotional stories, not just personal, but everyone from home. And so climate activism is our everyday life in Tuvalu, in Kiribati, in Solomon, in Fiji. We have to adapt every single day to the challenges that the climate impact throws our ways. And currently, right now, climate change has an existential impact, existential threat to an identity of a Pacific girl, that now it not only revolves around our environment, but to our culture, our heritage, everything that we hold dear. And so, you know, it's everything now, basically. It's our entire lives. And we are having conversations such as climate mobility, having to move from one nation to another nation, having to relocate. And personally, I'm not ready for that conversation. But it's a conversation that we need to talk about, because what is plan B for a Tuvaluan young girl? What is plan B for my children? What is plan B for my grandchildren? And so climate activism is an everyday thing for us. And the other question was,
The road to COP31, what does feminist-led climate justice look like to you?
what does it look like? To me, what that would look like is having the women at the front, is having the girls at the front instead of having them at the back and be like, can you pass me notes on what I should say to this event? Can you pass me notes on what I should do? It's time that we shift the narratives from having men, from having boys at the front, and perhaps finally involving women and girls at the front. In the Pacific, we hear a lot about gender equality, gender equity in the papers, and it looks very, very nice in the reports. But in real life, who do we see most at the table? Who do we see the most sitting at the table? Men. And the women are out there in their communities. The girls are out there in their communities doing all the work that needs to be done. And that's at the stage that we're at currently. So in COP31, I hope to see more women representation in all the pavilions, in the seats that matter, that actually makes has the voice, has a change. More women in these spaces, more female leadership, and more female representation. Not just internationally, but perhaps we can start from the big ocean states. Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Tiein, what role has climate activism played in your life?
Right. So, for my experience, how I came into the climate space, and this started, I think, just a few years back. I would say like 5 years back. I started my first youth-led climate project with Kitione. The project was called Atoll Youth Climate Leaders. And this program is my first experience working on a youth-led climate project. And in this program, we worked on youth leadership, community involvement to build capacity in climate change with local communities so that they can understand what climate change is about. Climate change awareness in my local communities, it is something new. I remember our experience in our first capacity building on climate change in this project with Kitione. We had we had a questionnaire sent out to the youth that attended our first capacity building on climate change. We told them what climate change means for them, like do they know what climate change is? And a majority of them didn't know what climate change is about, but throughout our other activities in the next days, they talked a lot about what they're experiencing, coastal erosion, droughts, and we told them that even though they said or they reported in the questionnaires that they didn't know what climate change is, but the things they wrote, the challenges that they're facing in their communities, that is climate change. And in the workshops that we held, we discussed or we worked with them. We made awareness about what ways that we can do to adapt and mitigate to the climate impacts. And then from then on, after stepping out of my shell, I'm usually a conservative person, but just thinking about all the things that's happening in our communities, and especially on climate education, which is not everyone knows about in my community. That brought me out of my shell, that took me out of my comfort zone, and that was how I was able to reach out to more communities, did more community work so that they can understand what they're going through and how we can work out how we will be able to deal with them, what the challenges they are facing. And that experience gave me the courage to become the voice or to bring the voices and concerns of our people, not only at the local platforms, but then moving on to regional platforms, and then eventually attending COPs, international platforms, to advocate not only about, or not to just tell stories, as mentioned, about what we're facing in the local communities, but mostly advocate about resilience of our country, and then demanding call for actions alongside other like-minded youths in this platform, and also sitting with us in this panel today. So yeah.
Amazing.
So, sorry, the second question.
The second question.
Yeah, the second question, what the roadmap to COP31 would look like for me. Just as Grace mentioned, putting girls at involvement of girls in decision making, and in this COP and in the COPs ahead, I hope that there's a lot of more representation of girls in the negotiation room. Like that's one of the goal that I have for me attending COP this year, is trying to go into the negotiation room and not just telling stories in side events. And I hope that will be the case as well in the lead up to COP31, having more youth representatives of young girls, girls from youth-led and women-led organizations from whatever country they come from, to understand what the processes in the negotiation look like. But I believe being in these spaces would elevate more, not just, it's not just about girls showing up in these spaces, but it's about how they can be part of the solutions and what meaningful actions that will come out of it. So, yeah.
Thing. So, the road to COP31 looks like girls being at the decision-making table. Tanya, you have been a climate activist not only in your home, the Solomon Islands, but your work is global. Can you tell us what role has climate activism played in your life?
Thank you, Kupa, for the question. It's very inspiring to listen to Grace and my Pacific sisters, I would say, to listen to how climate activism has played a significant role in their lives. For me, I came into the climate space when I joined the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, a youth-led organization that is campaigning for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change and its link to human rights. I would say that climate activism, the same as my two sisters, is a part of our daily lives, and it is a significant part of the work that I do with the Solomon Islands Climate Action Network. For me, it is about raising awareness on climate change issues, working with vulnerable women and girls who are part of the Solomon Islands Climate Action Network, working to ensure to amplify and raise their voices on the climate change issues that they are facing, but also help them to advocate on solutions that are tailored to their needs. And also helping to foster conversations that would help the women and girls to be part of the decision making at all levels, whether to contribute to solutions that to address the climate crisis that they're facing. So decision making, whether it be in the local level, national, and global stage as this. And climate activism for me is not just about sharing our stories, but it is about a greater cause for the future of younger girls that would come after us, and the future of our communities, to make sure that we safeguard and protect our culture and our identity, as well as to ensure that the generations that come after us are able to experience the human rights that we have now, our basic human rights to food, water, as well as to education as well. And then for the second question, what would be the roadmap to a global-led feminist climate justice look like in the lead up to COP? Yeah, to me, same as Grace and my sister here, it would be in any roadmap, the heart of it would be to have our girls and young women be at the center of it. Young women, especially from Pacific Island nations like Solomon Islands, but other island nations as well, to be at the decision-making table. So this means that actively involving them in climate policies, actions that affect their futures. Not just be in the room, but actually be part of the conversations, be part of the decision making, to have their concerns put on the front of the decisions. Girls must be given the platform to advocate for their needs, be it in the local, national, or global space as this COP. So in the lead up to COP31, I would like to see at COP31 opportunities for more young girls and women in the Pacific be part of the delegation, to have a good number of girls be part of the delegations coming into COP31, to be engaged in the negotiations. And with that, also providing education for these girls to understand this process, to be able to engage in the COP negotiations, equipping them with knowledge and the confidence as well to become leaders in climate resilience and advocacy. And this means creating safe spaces where our women can discuss and take action on climate-related issues. Thank you.
Pacific girls are leaders, and they must be given the opportunity to forge solutions for their future. Caroline, your bread and butter is forging partnerships to create change. How did this work come about? How has climate activism impacted your life?
Yeah, I did not start any form of advocacy or activism until I was in my 20s, my very early 20s. And that's because when I was growing up, and you hear these stories of young women being part of movements, the response to me was, it's okay, your time will come. And then it wasn't until I was, I think, 21, 22, and as part of my studies, I had to do this media assignment, and that meant following this group around. And I was very humbled in that space to hear that for some of the advocates, the activists in the room, their advocacy started as young as 12, as young as 8. And I thought, if children are already part of social movements and already creating waves, then why is the 20-year-old that's following them around not doing anything useful? I was there to cover stories as part of my studies, which I really should complete. But I was very humbled just listening to the journey of these young women who started their advocacy when they were 8 because they were curious about what was happening around them. They knew that their focus needed to be elsewhere and not just in the 4 walls of their classroom. And so that really got me involved in seeking out organizations that could work with young people who had track record of supporting the leadership of young women into these advocacy spaces. And now that I'm still 30, haven't gone past 30 yet, but now that I'm in a position of leadership within a coalition, I can look back at the experiences that I had as a young woman and think, I want to share that journey with someone. I'm at the stage now where I'm not exactly youth, but I can be a mentor to those who are wondering, how do we get started in this space? Because even as young women, nobody really takes us seriously until we have something to prove. But it's really hard to prove a point when no one wants to open doors, no one wants to share their knowledge. And I refuse, and I'm one of many young women who refuse to be gatekeepers to that knowledge. We have to open doors as young people for those who are already doing the work. It's not easy because even in the movement, even within the gender movement, within the climate movement, we have to be very aware of the privilege and the power that we hold. And for young women who have had to navigate some of these conversations, we also have to be very clear about what intergenerational learning should look like for everyone. It's not that we're telling old people to step aside, no, but we want to learn from you the same way that we want you to listen to us as well about the things that matter to us. We also want you to listen to how we want to do things and see if there's a compromise that we can reach. And so as a coalition, we aren't starting up a whole new movement. We're just coordinating efforts between those of us who already work in the space. But what we're doing as well is looking at who else we can learn from. There are other networks that we are working with. For example, the Pacific Girl program that's led by the Pacific Women Lead at the Pacific Community Team. We are also learning from them about what girls actually want to learn before they come into spaces like this. And Tanya gave a really good example about the need to understand what goes on in the negotiation, in the processes. It's not fair to keep taking our stories from us and speaking for those stories out there in the negotiation spaces. You bring us out here, you hear our stories, but at the same time, support and invest in our capacity to be able to negotiate for ourselves. And as we head towards hopefully a Pacific COP in 2026, because I'm really, really tired of taking 2 days to get to places that matter. But as we look forward to COP 2026, there's going to be more money, and we already know this as Pacific actors, there's going to be more money coming into the Pacific from people who want to partner from us, but who don't want to center our voices in the decision-making spaces. And I think as allies in the movement, we should be demanding that we don't just take these stories as evidence, but let's take people themselves into those spaces so that they can decide what solutions, what the recommendations should be as we work towards implementing some of these policies in our countries. I think it's really unfair that we keep using girls and young women as case studies in side events, but we don't really feature them in the main plenary halls. You keep using us as case studies in your policies, but our recommendations for some reason don't seem to make the cut. I think it's time we stop with that kind of posturing, and I think we also need to start looking at what allyship means, what partnership, what collaboration should mean. And I think that starts with centering the voices of women and girls, not just as your evidence, but as your partners in decision makers. And for us, as we look forward to COP31 being held in the Pacific, we would really love to see what meaningful collaboration, what meaningful engagement should look like between our partners in the Pacific, but also our partners within First Nations communities, within the Maori communities, and also with other indigenous communities from countries that we all come from. So I would like to see something on paper that's actually meaningful, but also the resources that it takes to action all this, because it's not cheap. But the resources exist. We just need to have the political will to move those resources into the areas of work that matter. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Before we move into our last question, I just want to read another story from the Pacific Girls Report, which is, I'm worried about the future. I'm worried about losing my family to the future. This quote raises the question that for those of us who are not from the Pacific or in close proximity to it, what can we do to best support Pacific girls? What can we do as individuals? But let's broaden that out to represent some of the parties here. What can we do as NGOs? What can we do as the UN, as governments, and as multilateral banks? What needs to be done to make sure that we are the best supporters and amplifiers of Pacific girls? Grace, do you want to take that on?
Can we turn it to, I think we should start from worksheets.
Caroline.
Caroline, represent all of us.
Yes. So before we started this panel, I decided to use my age privilege to go last. But now the young women are negotiating that. Why? Australia, why? Now the young women are negotiating that the oldest person on the panel goes first. I think I've made it clear enough. From the coalition standpoint, it's always going to come back to investing in young women's capacity to engage in spaces like this, not just using them to tick the box or to keep listening to their stories. There's real leadership that's coming out of the young women's movements that really need to be invested on. We need to dedicate the resources to continue to support that capacity. But we also, for those of us who work in the movements, and particularly those who work in women-led movements, we have to be real about the power that we hold as older women as well. We can't keep holding on to the spaces. We also need to let go of the power. We cannot keep speaking for young women and girls. So lucky for all of you, this might be one of the last youth events I speak in. But we also need to learn to create that enabling environment for young women to grow their leadership. There are very few spaces in the world where it's actually safe for young women and for young girls to actually grow their leadership. We have an obligation and a responsibility to enable those spaces for those who are coming up in the movement, who are showing real leadership already. And we also need to be clear about what that intergenerational approach should look like. For those of us who have access to the resources, again, I am re-emphasizing the fact that we need to have accessible funding to invest in the leadership of young girls who are already telling you how they want to work. I've said this before in this pavilion, probably why the mic keeps going off, and I will say it one last time as well. We want to keep the movement sustainable, we have to start investing in leadership. And that means making the resources available, which requires political will, because the people who hold the money don't like sharing money. But we need to hold them accountable because they've made the commitments politically, publicly. And so we need to demand that those resources come out to the communities who are already leading, who, again, we didn't have to lead. But industrial countries have forced our hands to come out here and say that we are on the front lines. You put us there on the front lines. So it's now time you give us the resources to build our capacity to lead the climate solutions as well.
Well said. Does anyone else want to take this question on? Tanya.
Okay. Wow, that's a very big question. So with the first question, what can we do as individuals? So as individuals, I believe that we may seem small, but as collective, we can make a huge impact. So as individuals, I believe that we have a responsibility to raise awareness, educate our communities, and advocate for stronger climate action network. Stronger climate action. So for us, at the Solomon Islands Climate Action Network, we are also a strong supporter of the ICJ campaign. So the oral hearing is on the 2nd of December, next month. So what you can do as individuals is to take part in the witness stand by sharing your story. So you can go on the Pacific Students Fighting Climate Change website, and then there's a link there where you can upload your story, share your story of how climate change has impacted you or your community, because this can be used at the oral hearing next month at the ICJ. So that is what you can do as individuals to support. And for us at the Solomon Islands Climate Action Network, we also engage with our youths and try to empower them to raise an awareness and be part of the solution. And we have individual members who are students and who are passionate about addressing the climate crisis in Solomon Islands. And as NGOs, we also work with local groups and women to implement community-led climate solution that integrates local solution and traditional knowledge, but also provide trainings that will give knowledge to our local groups, our local women and girls, to enhance their resilience in the face of climate breakdown. And one of the processes that we engage with our communities is with the integrated vulnerability assessment, where we work with women and girls to be able to identify their priority issues and their needs, and then they come up with the solution that is tailored to fit their context and needs of them as women and girls in the community. And as governments, we know that this year, this COP, they say that it's a climate finance COP. And we would like to see an outcome from this COP that supports the Loss and Damage Fund to be included in the NCQG, a finance that is grant-based and not loans, that would not give the burdens for developing countries to be able to repay the funds. We would also like to see a finance that prioritizes community-based, gender-responsive, and locally led solutions. Thank you.
I agree. That's a small comment that I would make, but just an experience that I would like to say. I'm coming as a young girl from my country, and one of the things that I always like to encourage my fellow youth back home, said, to become more courageous and show youth leadership. And I cannot stress more on the need for collaboration. As already mentioned, I'm part of the first youth-led organization in my country called Tungaru Youth Action, and we do capacity buildings for the youths in my country. But resources, we don't always have the resources to do more that we want to do for our youths or by the youths for our youths. And yeah, just gotta stress the importance of that collaboration with other local NGOs, regional NGOs, working towards the same common goal. And then with support, looking for support as well from government bodies, and not forgetting the UN and multilateral banks to support the efforts that we're doing at the local level. Thank you.
Okay, now I shall take the last one. I agree with all my feminists and my leaders here sitting with me. And I think the first one really nailed all the thoughts that we had. But I think I'll just end with something that, there's a saying that goes, it takes a village. It took a village for us to get here. And our villages comprises of the young girls, our communities, our parents, our tupunas, and our ancestors to get us to these spaces. Now, I would like to reflect that village here. What does a village for a girl from the Pacific or from the big ocean states look like? That our village would involve genuine global partnerships, really having the best interests of our countries at heart. And that is more collaboration within our international community, and having to support us in every spaces that we get, whether it be financially, capacity building, all of that involves us. And yeah, I would like to challenge that for everyone in this room. Faftailasi.
All right, we're in luck. We have time for one quick question. Does anyone here have a question for our phenomenal panelists?
I already put my mic down, so you can ask me.
Anyone? Nope, you've said it all. That's amazing. So throughout the course of this panel, we've heard that Pacific girls are leaders. They have the solutions. They're at the forefront of the climate movement. Their voices need to be in the plenary halls, shaping negotiation texts. And this is true for now, and this will be true for COP31 and the COPs ahead. And now, please give up the panelists a round of applause. One more time. And to close, we have a beautiful poem. So please turn your attention to the screen.
Climate change is not funny. All people care about is their money. From digging up oil, cutting down trees, we need more soil. Let's keep our world clean, not an ozone layer to be seen. We need more by far. Let's work as youth, and easy it will seem, and tackle through climate change. I need love, I need care. I am your home, but you destroy my skin and bone. But I forgive and I forget, and let you live, but I regret.